Welcome to the Christopher Peter Review, the economic perspective on our public policy, our economy, and our overall society. I believe it is important for people to be well informed on the issues that impact our lives, our financial well-being, and social experiences. We can hope everything comes out positive and things fall into place, but hope is not a strategy, and luck favors the prepared. Being informed allows you to prepare by making better decisions ahead of time when there is still time and resources, rather than in the midst of chaos when choices are limited and pressure is greatest. We also need to understand whether the information we are receiving on our traditional news broadcasts, radio shows, or new media is telling us the truth, or is the reporting serving as manicured content with a purpose? In this podcast episode, I want to discuss the media from a different perspective, other than the usual criticism, but where I think the industry is and where it will be going as the market changes. And then we have to discuss the themes and narratives around the issues as they currently stand. Let us begin another episode of the Christopher Peter Review. There is no press in America anymore, not in the original sense of the term, where the press was charged with informing the public, educating society on the actions of government and other power brokers in a mostly objective manner. There is a news industry, or an entertainment-adjacent industry that focuses on the current events of America, the world, and everything in between. This sector of our economy and society has a role to fill to serve the interests of the people while meeting the expectations of the investors that make their work possible. The media went from posturing about its civic duty and role in society to catfighting over ratings, returns, and breaking stories. Being the first to cover a topic became more important than providing the most comprehensive and accurate accounting of the event. This matters because we have to look at the quality performance versus just the financial performance. In essence, every industry out there serves a valid interest to society. Textiles provide needed clothing and material for life. Agriculture provides food and other materials. So there is a balance between being profitable and serving the interests at the same time. Those who are generally profitable are usually the ones people feel are serving the interests of the people. In our form of economic system, people vote by who they spend their money with and who they support with their time. The market leader in any industry may not be one you favor, but the market dictates that is the most favorable option to the masses. So how do we apply that framework to the press? I see many people raise concern about the splintering of the news, where each network is becoming highly concentrated on servicing a specific target market. For instance, MSNBC and CNN target progressives and liberals, while Fox News and others focus on center-rights and/or conservatives. Each ideological group believes that the providers serving their opposing viewpoint are doing a disservice to society. But the reality is that they are providing a service to the interest of society, and that is why they are drawing ratings that lead to revenues. The people determine the quality providers. And if there are multiple competitive entities, then the market is serving a diverse group of consumers of information satisfactorily, demonstrating what a competitive, healthy market should look like. I know not many people would say the current market is healthy, but from the perspective that people are able to find a solution that fits their needs and wants, that is healthy for our economy. The market for news is ever-changing. Competitors, disruptors, and grifters are always going to come and go. The way people are consuming news is changing, and many news organizations are adjusting to the times, with changes to how to distribute their content or connect with audiences. What counts as news content is evolving as traditional reporting may look different now than in the past. In the past, journalism was judged on how many sources a reporter had, including first-hand sources and the research to provide credibility to the findings. Now, accepted reporting may be seen by how you connect and agree with what you read, hear, or see. How stories make you feel is important, or how well they resonate with your communities or spheres of influence. People are not drawn to the modern-day Walter Cronkite's of American journalism, as they are to social media influencers who may be entertaining, but more narrative-driven than factual. That is a fair criticism, but that does not mean that these sources do not have a presence. It is up to consumers to weed out the bad actors and performers and elevate the effective quality ones. Eventually, the market will move towards quality. It always eventually gets there. Entertainment will blend with quality journalism at some point. Just have to be patient and elevate those who aim to provide factual information. I think it is important to be informed and exposed to positions and ideas that may support your points of views, and as well as ones that run counter to your way of thinking. That is how we learn. The operative perspective is to not feel like we know everything and accept only information that reinforces our self-importance, but accept challenges to our viewpoints. Many people across our society need to do that, and the news industry does provide a diverse variety of options to do just that. Welcome to the conversation portion of our podcast. In our conversation today, we are going to discuss the political narratives being thrown around. During the NFL draft, they talk about how there is a period called the silly season where teams try to influence where talent may be drafted to improve their odds of getting the player. In politics, there is the same type of sentiment where candidates, their party, and their surrogates say crazy things to influence how voters view the candidates, their platforms, and the issues. In a presidential election, this can get pretty out of hand and purposefully misleading. I think it is important to discuss the narratives and why they are being used, and whether we think it will be effective. In our modern-day environment, the rules governing how candidates win elections have changed a bit, and I think we need to understand how the political environment is evolving for the good, bad, or plain ugly. So, I turn once again to Jennifer to help lead our conversation on the narratives that drive our votes.
Thank you. The use of political narratives is not a new approach to politics. The innovative part is how they disseminate the narratives, and who is helping to amplify the messages. The echo chambers that exist help narratives get heard, but may do little to add credibility. For instance, there is a narrative that the Democratic Party is trying to associate with their Republican counterparts, and the Republican presidential nominee in Donald Trump, that the GOP is pro-Russia or pro-Putin. In their minds, if you question why we are depleting our arsenal, why are we supporting a war effort where we have no influence or ability to truly assist? Or why are wasting time with sanctions that will just galvanize the anti-American segment of the world? Then you must be pro-Russia. I think it is important to look at what each party and politician actually did, and what the outcomes of their policies were. The facts, evidence, and data may lead you to come to a different conclusion.
I think we all support Ukraine in their fight for survival, in a war that the results have been nothing more than a stalemate with the odds not looking good for the Ukrainian side. I think it is fair to question our policy approach that will only prolong the war and lead to more deaths. Part of political narratives is deflection of blame and projection of responsibility on other parties. There is a common approach where Democrats want to dissociate themselves with the results of their policies and project responsibility to their opponents, when they had complete control of the situation that led to the events. Let us recall that under the last two Democratic presidents, Barack Obama and now Joe Biden, Russia made the greatest progress, with its suspected goal of bringing Ukraine back under Russia. First, it took Crimea and other regions early in the Obama era, and now it looks like it will be able to secure additional regions in Ukraine, given the troop issues and where the conflict seems to stand. The Russian economy was reported to be among the strongest economies in the world despite the American and European sanctions, not reporting from Russia or sources friendly to them, but stories in American newspapers. So one cannot deny that Russia has done well for themselves when America has a Democrat as president and when the Democrats control Congress. Both invasions took place when that was the case in our government. So to say the Republicans are pro-Putin or Russia is neglectful of the facts of who was in power when they benefited most. I think it is important to have a multifaceted conversation about America's role in supporting our favored side in these global conflicts. We need to stand with the good, both with Ukraine and Israel, but also must ensure that there is a successful strategy in place, proper safeguards, and contingency plans. At some point, America and our allies need to know where our limits are. That may be an uncomfortable question for some, but a valid one nonetheless. While we may support providing arms to Ukraine, what happens when they start asking for soldiers? Are we going to escalate the event to a third world war? We need to know what the plan is. I do think that it is fair to ask America to make sure that Israel continues to be considerate of the impact on civilians as it proceeds with its rightful efforts to rid the area and the world of the dangerous and harmful terrorists that took the lives of thousands, and captured hostages that they despicably execute and use as human shields for the worst humans on earth. Those who say you must unquestionably support either conflict are being somewhat foolish. You can support the right while questioning the occurrences, the strategy, and the objectives.
Speaking of the Middle East, a big criticism of Donald Trump from Democrats was the perceived strong stance on NATO nations actually living up to their promises and commitments, where Democrats countered that our relationship with our allies must remain strong and uncontested. How does the current public policy and funding threats made by the Biden administration align with that sentiment? Our strongest and most loyal ally in the Middle East is unquestionably Israel, and we are threatening to pull funding if they continue to clear the last remaining stronghold of Hamas. Where were the strings on the funds that Biden sent to Iran shortly before Iran approved and coordinated the attacks with Hamas on Israel? Where is the condemnation of Hamas hiding behind the innocent men, women, and children that foolishly put them in power?
The terrible and horrific reality of war is that people will die in war, and not only the active participants. Even with the best efforts to protect against civilian death, there will still be some who lose their lives because they do not evacuate or get caught in crossfire. I think from what we have seen, Israel is doing everything it can to protect civilians, and giving them plenty of notice before engaging. But many Palestinians seem reluctant to leave their homes in fear of never being able to return. If you do not evacuate and lose your life in the arena of battle, you would not be able to go home. I think Biden is playing politics with war. He is seeing the radical protesters on college campuses and is bending the knee to them, in the same way that Democrats bent the knee to the radical Summer of Love protesters that led to more violence against African Americans by other African Americans, where the crimes were not prosecuted or the victims foolishly did not want to see another minority go to jail. To placate the radical hysteria-driven voters that have replaced the working-class voters in the Democratic base, Biden is not creating cracks between our key regional ally when we really should be standing on the side against extremist terrorism that costs lives both there and here at home. We can call out allies for not taking their commitments and responsibilities as seriously as they should have without the alliance falling apart. If they are going to flee because they are skipping out of the bill, then can we reasonably trust them to live up to their commitments when it matters most? On one end, Trump being so out front with the criticism might not have been helpful, but in hindsight it was a message that Europe should have accepted earlier. Russia probably knew that there were many in Europe or in Canada not committing the required funds or troops. Therefore, the alliance that is meant to contain it was lacking the funds and ability to potentially respond to aggression if it took place. Too many in Europe got politically fat and lazy and took their eyes off the ball, and they were not well prepared to respond when a threat arose. Now, Ukraine was not a member of NATO or an ally of NATO at the time of the attack, so even if NATO lived up to every penny and troop, it might not have changed the outcome. But we do need consistency on this issue. We should expect our allies to live up to their responsibility, and we should live up to our responsibility as well. Otherwise, why should nations like Israel support us when we need staging grounds for our missions and intelligence support?
There is an underlying question of whether progressive liberal-minded people understand the difference between good and bad, right and wrong. Based on policies in blue states run by politicians holding progressive values as a badge of honor, there is legitimate concern over whether or not they understand the difference between right and wrong.
I believe we all want a nation where laws matter and rules apply universally to everyone equally and fairly. That may be utopic, but I generally think that regardless of your ideological or political leanings, the rule of law is something that we want to see more of than less of, while at the same time we do not want it to be overt and oppressing to anyone. Our judicial and legal system should enforce laws consistently and not simply for political purposes. The standard we all can agree with is that if a crime happened and there is evidence connecting an individual to the crime, then the person should be apprehended in a safe and reasonable manner and prosecuted. The problem is when our legal system operates based on political need, like when a politician wants to look like they are tough on crime following a notable incident. You may see increased enforcement of applicable laws until the local media is distracted, like what happens when there are traffic accidents. More ticketing and police patrols are usually done in that area. And also when the laws are applied based inconsistently and unevenly. If prosecutors, law enforcement, or other agencies do not prosecute certain crimes, or reduce the level of charges in handling certain crimes, then they need to be consistent and should not be able to proceed willy-nilly, or simply to achieve certain objectives not in the best interests of society. Over time, Democrats have become weaker on crime, despite the federal crime bill being passed under Bill Clinton, supported by Joe Biden. During the Obama era, there was a reasoned call to look at the inconsistency of how laws were enforced and sentences were handed out. Not unreasonable, but should not have led to laws not being enforced if there are real victims and cost to society. Sidebar: every crime has a victim. There is no such thing as a victimless crime, but certain crimes can be better served with restitution, fines, and potential bans than imprisonment. Moving on to the present, the progressive took a reasonable approach and injected it with a steroid of radicalism, where crimes would be enforced based on identity stats, certain offenses that are not really offenses are jailable, and politically motivated actions are now acceptable. While there is a narrative trying to make it appear like America is safer now than ever before, the reality is it is not. Simply the stats are being managed and criminals are getting away with their actions. People are seeing beyond the narratives because it is hard to miss.
Another area where the public are being asked to believe something many feel is clearly untrue, based on what they are experiencing firsthand, is the condition of the economy. The message that our leaders want people to believe is that the economy is doing well, focusing on the job numbers and the stock market, ignoring the dips. The frustration from policymakers is the public is not accepting that message, as it is a major issue in political polls impacting the upcoming presidential election. What people experience is conflicting with what the narrative is telling them.
The economy is a hard space to judge if you are not an economist, investor, business leader, or in the finance space, because perception of the economy is highly subjective to the perspective of the person or interest. If you received a promotion, a significant raise, or a new job, then you might not believe that the economy is potentially heading towards a recession. If your company had a great quarter or stronger than expected performance, then you might believe the economy is strong. Even for economists, the economy is judged at different levels, from different industry perspectives, and across different factors to see if there are trends that give credence to one leaning or another. When the economy is good, not every industry, business, or person is doing well. Even when it is bad, not every industry, business, and person is struggling. Some sectors or spaces may be more recession-proof than others, or simply produce a product or service with greater elasticity in the moment than others. For instance, pretend that you are running a health system and your leadership tells you that your system is facing a shortage of nurses to safely function, and the salaries are too low to attract talent. Even in the midst of a recession, you may decide to hire more nurses at a higher rate, because the overall business decision is operational, not just financial. Healthcare is a more recession-proof industry than others, because sickness and injuries do not care what the stats say or timing. But a leader in the food industry may still increase hiring and pay if they have an operational need that is of greater concern than the financial concern, or can mitigate the impact. There is quite a bit of economic data that concerns me as a political economist. First, the inflation impact on individual spending. While the growth in inflation is slowing, the impact is increasing noticeably in the level of credit people are using and the higher sustained balances. Also, there were many companies that did have a strong end-of-year performance financially. Many announced better than expected results while releasing plans to trim labor. The performances for some that had strong performance have dipped a bit in the first quarter, which leads me to believe that they accurately predicted the downturn. There are more voices returning of a recession and greater concern over a not-so-soft landing. Some are even saying we are currently in a recession, but the data says that we are not. Because we have not had negative economic growth, our growth may be slowing, but recession is a reduction in the size of the economy, not just the slowing of growth. Whether we face a recession or not, the fact of the matter is that the current state of our economy is filled with great challenges, and the future does not seem bright under the current policy prescription. People do not feel confident in the direction of our public policy.
Finally, let's go back to justice issues for a moment. The position we took on the Scottie Scheffler arrest can be reasonably portrayed as being sympathetic towards the athlete or superstar. How does that align with the idea that all people should be treated the same, or that justice should be blind?
I heard something on sports television that I thought was quite interesting. That people should be all treated fairly but not equally, meaning that people should all be given fair and equal opportunity to show their worth. But the better performers and stars should get a bit of leeway based on their contributions and reputations. The same commentator in another argument did point out that just because you do not like a person does not make them wrong. Celebrities and other high-profile stars are afforded preferential treatment at times, because the attention placed on the prosecutors can impact careers and outcomes. Society holds irrational views over law enforcement, but that should not play a role in whether a crime is committed. When I discussed the Scottie Scheffler situation, I tried to focus on how the situation played out from a perspective of the city given its history, and what would have been the best path given the facts at the moment. More came out afterwards. The negativity was not really helpful in my opinion, to the view of what I believe to be a good city overall. There were many people who rushed and took the race angle. That is expected given the hysteria in our society. But what still seems consistent even after further reporting, was that there was confusion over what was going on, and we do not know what Scheffler heard, actually did, or what the officers said or did. There were claims afterwards that he ignored orders, and a cop who cuffed himself was injured. While we support cops and law enforcement here, the act of cuffing yourself to a moving car seemed really odd, and Scheffler also pointed out that he thought he was doing what they told him to do. Seems like the police were very engaging and actually not as worked up as the clips made them seem. But, from a high-level perspective, I took it as the city could have handled it differently, knowing that a golfer at the event hosted a few yards away was trying to get in the arena. We do not really know what led to the confusion or the decision to arrest other than an order was overlooked or maybe not even heard. Sometimes orders given by police officers are not easily discernible. Some may give conflicting signals that can be misunderstood. Communication could have been better, and I do think it is fair to accommodate the stars playing in the event, even in the middle of the tragic event. That aspect is not lost here one bit. Arresting a star and again not having a body cam on just gave more bad light. They could have sent an officer to cite him or handle it after the day's event, a less dramatic path than the one they chose to take, but I do think it is a fair question. A big thank you to all of you in the audience. Your viewership is appreciated and valued. As we continue down the path towards electing the deserving candidate for their respective second term, we will continue looking at the issues, their records, and what the best policy outcomes should be. I will also focus more on blending the economic and political perspectives on our selected topics. Our next discussion will focus on our values in various areas of our society. Please further the Christopher Peter Review on social media, and continue to visit www.crcreview.com for new episodes. Thank you once again. Until next time,